All right, if you can hear me, you're signed in correctly. Let's go ahead and get things going here. Let me get my camera on so you can see me. There you go. Good morning, everybody. So it's good to have you here. So let's get our slides up so that you can get going and our topic today. Here we go. Should be able to see that. That should be coming up for you. There we go. Good. All right, so I've got time. So good morning, everyone. It's good to have you this morning. Thank you so much for being part of our training today. We're going to be talking about increasing effective transfer of knowledge and impactful closeouts. This is a topic that many people have asked me about individually during training. And so what happens is you find yourself talking about it over and over again. And so I thought this would be a good venue for us to be able to take a look at this and kind of go a little bit deeper, kind of do a deep dive in a couple of areas. And many of you I know have got a lot of experience in doing this. And a lot of times when we've talked about it, I've actually picked up and learned ideas from you guys from just different things that you've shared on how you do it. So the purpose of this and doing this is to take you through some pieces and just kind of stimulate your thought process and give you some ideas of some things. So we're going to be talking about increasing effective transfer of knowledge and impactful closeouts. Now, the objectives of what we're looking at today is going to focus on exploring the process and the breadth of closing out a project. As you know, PMI looks at our closeouts for the most part across the world that we really kind of do a lousy job. It's kind of the dump and run philosophy, to be honest about it. We kind of throw it at the customer and take off. And so if you're not one of those, God bless you, that's great. But so many times that is what happens. And a lot of it is just the sheer nature of what we do. We get into these situations to where what happens is that we've got a lot of pressure and a lot of other projects on our plate, and we're already having that demand for us to go someplace else. So it creates something that's really, really difficult for us. Second, define a process for knowledge transfer and verification of the transfer. So we're going to really get specific on that today. We're going to compare the handoff process between traditional and agile, and we'll talk about that a little bit, discuss the handoff process in general and give you some ideas, and then examine the issues of archiving the documents, which is just a slide on that to where we talk about it, because we are archiving documents now, if you're not already doing that, for learning. And so that you're archiving the documents so that people are able to pull this and be able to use this in future projects. So let's get into this. All right, so there's really two different viewpoints on knowledge transfer. And so if you think about the projects you've worked with, maybe you've worked with a vendor and they were really good on knowledge transfer, or you've worked with someone and they really were not that good on knowledge transfer. And it could be because of how we set it up. And I'm not saying you, I'm just saying in general, how we set things up. So if I'm working with a vendor and I'm wanting them to do knowledge transfer, it might make a difference on what on some of the objectives or deliverables I put in my contract, or it might make a difference on how we structure our meetings, just as a suggestion to you. So knowledge transfer takes place throughout the entire project, or knowledge takes place at the end of the project. Now, those of you who've been doing this for a long time, you know as well as I do, the end of the project is one of the big challenges, because if the project has any substance at all and has lasted for any length of time, we have a tendency to forget some of that stuff that we did in the early stages. So what happens is we talk about the stuff that's happened in the last 3, 4, 5 months, something like that, unless we've been documenting it all the way through. But the big thing I think that we miss on knowledge transfer is going to be that piece of knowledge transfer early on in the project. I think Agile has really tapped in on that, of being able to educate their people as they go. And so that's really been a strong proponent in Agile and Scrum type of projects, is after each sprint, you should be doing what's called a retrospective, which is basically a lessons learned over that sprint. So your people are growing as they come. So there's some benefits in doing it as you move along. So knowledge transfer throughout the project. Periodic times are scheduled to transfer knowledge for the new product, service, or process. The customer places someone to shadow those with the project knowledge, and this person learns as the project progresses toward the end. Another abbreviated version of this, if you don't have a person who's going to shadow somebody, like none of you probably have this much, is because of the skeleton crews that we all seem to be working in the workplace right now. The other thing that you could do in something like this for knowledge transfer throughout, even on the traditional side, is the idea of having periodic knowledge transfers rather than just at the end. Many of you are doing post-mortems to look and see what problems we could potentially have, but you could also do your knowledge transfers and your lessons learned periodically. For an example, I know many of you are running phases. A phase is a perfect spot for you to do a knowledge transfer at the end of it and learn what you learned from that phase, which could carry over into the next phase. Many of you may have larger deliverables. Now, sometimes the lessons learned would become pretty mundane if you're talking about a 3-day deliverable and you're trying to do it at the end of each deliverable. But I know many of you have some deliverables that really, you might have several months involved in that deliverable, and then you've got that, that product that you're being able to finish and actually have a good lessons learned over that deliverable. So if you have a more substantial deliverable, you might even do this. One of the things that I'm seeing in literature is that people are starting to realize that we've got to transfer the knowledge faster than at the end, and we've got to be more concise. And what happens is at the end, you usually just get the last few things that either went really good or really bad. And that's what comes up. And so that's just something for you to think about as to where can we do these short mini knowledge transfers of lessons learned. Okay, we finished with that phase one. Let's in our meeting today, we're going to do a mini lessons learned of what do we learn in phase one. And then at the end of phase two, we try it again. And so that would allow us to pick up some speed on some of this. The project, the knowledge transfer at the end of the project, which has been very common in traditional projects for years. The project's complete, and prior to closing out the project, the knowledge is transferred to the customer or customer group. Certainly, this is a weak area in most of our processes. And the reason is because those of you guys, men and women who are in the area of technology, you already see this, that you're trying to train that customer or that customer group how to use the software, how to maintain the software possibly, if you're doing it internally. And so what you're finding yourself doing is that, the training is limited, the maintenance is limited, and you kind of coach them probably over the next few months if you're internal. The challenge, though, is when you have the vendor doing this. The vendor is not real motivated sometimes unless you've really nailed it down in the contract. And so the vendor might not be passing that information over as much as you want. So the shadow makes sense in that situation because you're not wanting to keep that vendor on the books for any longer than you have to on the maintenance side. You want them to help you with the project, but you're really wanting to maintain it, I bet, internally as much as possible. So the customers feel that the project did not schedule enough time and effort to transfer knowledge, and hands down, most of us would say amen, because we do agree with this. If we're looking at transferring knowledge, it can't be something that we throw together within a couple of days at handoff. Okay, it's got to be one of those milestones or one of those phases that we have built into our project that's so many weeks out, and there's no rhyme or reason on how many weeks out, because every project will be different, but that you've started thinking about how are we going to transfer the knowledge to that customer, and how much time do we need. If they're going to have to be trained, obviously it's going to have to be more substantial. So you're looking at it, but you're also engaging your customer into this too, on how are we going to transfer that knowledge over to your people. And so it's a tag team effort between the two. Now, experts in the future are telling us a lot of things about this transfer of knowledge in the area of project management. Millennial experts, they're very open. They say that millennials are open to passing along knowledge willingly. They share and answer all questions posed by the learner. Knowledge transfer is fast, precise, supported, and learners receive customized and timely information. So we're kind of in a time of life here with the changing of the baby boomers retiring, and you're seeing the millennials really come in strong at 77 million. They are built with the right mindset for transfer of knowledge. They're open to it, and they're willing to share. And so in their culture and their mindset, which is awesome, is that they see the benefit of transferring that knowledge to people around them. They don't feel like they should just, hang on to that knowledge and it's mine and I've got power with it. Most millennials, in almost every survey you look at, are very willing for the coaching, the mentoring, and the sharing of this information. So this is a great asset, whether the millennials are doing the training and passing on the information, or whether they're being trained, doesn't matter. They're very open to it on either way. So this just breeds that transparency and that connectivity to that customer. So there's 4 stages of learning, of a learning model, and you're a subject matter expert. The first I thought was interesting is this idea of unconscious incompetent. And so this person does not know what she does not know. And we have these people, don't we? We don't know what we don't know. We've all had this, haven't we? We don't even know how to ask a question. We're so lost on the topic. And so I've just been put on a team for artificial intelligence and with the university. And so I'm learning all the background of artificial intelligence and how people can abuse it, obviously, in an education setting. And so one of the things I'm looking at is this idea of unconscious incompetence. I don't even know, and it's been cool learning this stuff, but you don't even know how to ask the question in some cases. The second one would be conscious incompetence. You know what she does not know, knows what she does not know. And so what happens here is that you think, okay, here's my gap over here, but I do know this pretty well. And we see this, for an example, people working on their PMP. They know how to run projects. What's their gap? Their gap is the PMP material, the way PMI asks the questions and looks at things. The third is conscious competence. They know what she knows. She knows what she knows. And so we feel confident in that area in a lot of ways. We're very competent in some areas and we feel comfortable in these particular areas. So when we work in those areas, that's good. And then the last one is unconscious competent. Does not know what she knows. And so we might be competent, but we might not know that we're competent in that area. We might not know that we're far above everybody else in that knowledge area. So I thought this was an excellent idea here of these stages of learning, because what it does, it kind of puts you into different categories a little bit, and it allows us to be able to realize that, the point is that we need to grow, we're needing to expand in some areas, but sometimes the person that you think has the most experience might not have the most confidence to be willing to share or be shadowed with someone else. So it all goes back down to this idea of retaining expert knowledge. And many of our companies watch expert knowledge walk out our doors. Think about baby boomers that left after 30 or 40 years and we shadowed them for 3 or 4 days, or something silly like that. And you watch 40 years of expertise walk out the door, and we didn't plan for that. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about some of this expert knowledge. So you have that unconscious incompetence way up here on the front end of this. And then here in the middle someplace, you'll have this conscious incompetence, and then conscious competence. We're starting to get better. And then, of course, obviously, as you start building stronger in this knowledge, you have that unconscious competence. We start getting stronger all the time. And you probably know more than you even think you know in some cases. And we all find ourselves doing that. Once you get the frame of reference, you think, wow, you know what? I actually know that. I don't call it any of those things, but I know that. I hear that every week we do a PMP boot camp. I don't call it any of the right stuff, but we do everything you're talking about. And so that's that unconscious competence. They thought they knew nothing about the PMP, and really they do, but they've just got to learn new terms and to be able to look at that. Now, what is the shelf life for knowledge? This piece of research I thought was really interesting, because knowledge is going so fast, and you probably have seen that. If you're in an educational program already, you probably have already seen that. If you're someone who's looking at that knowledge just for yourself and for staying up to date on as a worker, you probably have noticed, man, knowledge is just coming like crazy. So Penn State research says 50% of an organization's total knowledge is in the employees' heads. Now, what's the problem with this? The problem with this is that when you've got turnover as fast as you will have, and of course, the average turnover right now in America right now is 4 years and 3 months. So that means some people are leaving their jobs about every 4 years and 3 months. And some, it's going to be even faster. Some will be a little slower, obviously. But if that knowledge is not being transferred over to someone else or documented in some way, we're watching that knowledge go out the door. In 1982, futurist and inventor R. Buckminster Fuller estimated that up until 1900, human knowledge doubled approximately every century. By 1945, it was doubling every 25 years. Right now, they're saying it's doubling every 3 years. And so I don't know how correct that is, but it's come up on the news several times. And so everybody continues to go to that quote. It's doubling every 3 years. And you're seeing us be able to just learn so many things so much faster, and so much knowledge is coming at us from those. An article in Industry Tap written by David Schilling shared that not only is human knowledge on average doubling every 13 months, but we are also quickly on our way with the help of the internet to double knowledge every 12 hours. Now, many of you have just tapped into this artificial intelligence that they've been reporting on the news. And you know that they have just had a big jump in the abilities just in the last 12 months. And of course, that's the reason why everybody's looking at it from an education standpoint. And of course, everybody's talking about the horrors of all of this and what it could do. And so even Hinton, one of the main developers of AI from years ago, is concerned that it's growing too fast. You probably noticed just recently, yesterday or day before, he actually quit Google so that he could tour without having any restrictions about why he thinks AI is growing too fast. Now, this is the developer of it, which I think is interesting. So you'll hear more and more from Hinton in the next month, because that he purposely has quit his job so that he could talk about slowing it down so that you could put some restrictions on AI. Now, nobody's saying that AI can't be abused, just like the internet can be abused, right? All of us would agree to that. But think of all the cool things it can do. And so we'll talk about that in another training. But for the purpose of knowledge sharing, all that's going to do is just cause us to jump that much faster in the ability to grow. Now, demonstrating respect during knowledge transfer. Here's a couple of things that we want to think about in looking at knowledge transfer. Treat those needing the training or knowledge transfer with respect. This is one of the surveys, comes up on surveys from time to time when people are transferring knowledge, is that they didn't feel respectful. They felt like they were being talked down to. So look at the situation through the eyes of the learner, demonstrate mercy and patience while allowing others to learn from you. Focus on demonstrating and doing. First demonstrate, then allow the person to go through the process and do the same thing, and then support and praise even when correcting or giving them another way of doing it. This is a huge piece, because if people don't feel like they are praised or encouraged, or that they're disrespected, they're not going to try it. None of us do. You raise your voice to me on something I'm learning, let me tell you something, I don't want to be around you. And most of us don't want that. So when we're trying to transfer knowledge, your basic role is an encourager. They ask a stupid question, guess what? You're encouraging. They're going through the wrong process. You say, let me show you how to do this again. This might be a little easier for you. You're encouraging. You are the official encourager in all of this as you're trying to train the people. There's also that change in learning styles. Now, we know baby boomers are almost all out of the workplace. In the next 3 years, probably 98% of them will be. So they learn in small, short time frames. They would scan the table of contents. They look for information, but they looked at it pretty much old school. Everything was pretty much books, paper, and those things. And of course, then they were introduced to the internet, which changed a lot of that. Millennials, on the other hand, which I thought was interesting, is they learn in real time and on demand. They participate in what's called deep learning. And deep learning, you're going to hear about even more in the next few years, that's connected to artificial intelligence. But what happens is the millennials have had at their fingertips internet their whole life. So you have information that you find when you need that. Content must be delivered in a manner desired by the group. And so what happens is you have on-demand learning. How many times have we just Googled stupid stuff on our phone? One in our traveling through some little town, and it said they are the home of vinegar. Now think about how stupid this is. This is just worthless knowledge, okay? The home of vinegar. And so in a few minutes, we're Googling vinegar to find out, how do you make vinegar, since you're going to be the home of vinegar. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't find my car keys, but I can tell you how to make vinegar. I mean, just silly stuff. But we have kind of developed that. You look up stuff that is of interest to you. Now, as we look at the levels of knowledge, here's what we're looking at: current business knowledge, knowledge for future products or services, and then knowledge for historical preservation. We've got to be concerned about all three. Obviously, not current business knowledge we want, and we use that. But a lot of times we're not thinking about the knowledge of historical preservation. And this is where sometimes we have learning for historical purposes on our projects, is that we can pull the archives from projects that were very similar to this. Some of the projects you and I have done, you will do, but you won't do that project for many years. And so this is the information that you really are wanting to know, is how did they do that? What were they thinking when they did this? And so it can be very, very important. But our problem is that we don't have a good job and good way of getting to that historical information. So understanding the KSIs, the knowledge, the skills, the attitude, who you're going to be training, and what is it they need to know, and what is it that you're going to be showing them. And you might not be the only person needing to transfer that knowledge over. So what is their current knowledge? And just because someone says they have a current knowledge of this, they don't necessarily. And so how can you do that and still be still be kind? How can you do it and check to see, do they really know it? And then you're transferring those skills. And then what is our attitude on being able to do that? If you've ever worked with a person who was not a good person to train someone else or got frustrated very quickly, attitude has everything. I'm not going to ask you because we don't have time in this setting, but if you've got a teenager, let me just ask the question, who's teaching that teenager to drive? Usually one parent can teach them because they're very patient. The other one's like, oh my gosh, we're going to die before the day is over. It's that mindset. So we will see that happen from time to time. So that attitude of how can we encourage and at the same time not be freaking out because they're doing something wrong. All right, so what do the people already know? That's going to be a piece of it. You've got to evaluate that somehow. And then what do they actually do? And how are they going to use those skills? Because that can make a huge difference. I've seen people go overkill on something that most people are not even going to actually use. And then how do they work, or what is their attitude in working? Obviously, working in teams, which is very common for us today, is something that we're going to be doing. But the point is that one of the pieces that's so important for us is that ability to be able to connect to those people as fast as possible, and once again be that encourager in those situations. Now, the other thing I want to show you is this chart on knowledge gap. So what is a knowledge topic? How important is it? Is it important or critical? Now, obviously, you're trying to transfer over these critical pieces that people need to know, okay? But there's going to be some important stuff that supports those critical pieces. So the thought is that, oh, I've trained them in everything that's critical. I get it. But that important stuff is going to support the critical. And so if some of the important stuff, you have enough important stuff go wrong that they don't know, it's going to turn into something critical. So you've got to be able to tag team both of these situations as you do this. So this kind of brings us to the idea of continuous process improvement for knowledge management. It's because knowledge is growing, our organizations need that knowledge to be able to make good decisions now in the future. And so you're looking at several things. For an example, listing known areas that you need to work on, that needs to be worked on, prioritizing information, searching for SMEs or experts, organizing knowledge for transfer, and then transferring tacit and explicit knowledge, because one's going to be written down, one's coming from the head of the experts. How do we get it from that head to the people? Verifying the transfer has actually happened. Not that they just spent time together, but that actually happened. And then evaluating the competency of that person. Now, to give you an example of this real quick, when the Bush administration was in office, a order went out for anyone who had knowledge in power plants, nuclear power plants. And most of our nuclear power plants, I could be off for you, those of you who are in the power industry, I think it's right at 40 plus years. And so they started pulling people in who had knowledge of the power plants to be able to create some documentation that they felt like might be lacking in those areas, because many of these people were starting to retire. And of course, some of the older ones had actually already died. And that's what you're getting into, is are we allowing that knowledge to die with somebody or to leave with someone who did not transfer it on? Now, I want you to see that we have two types of forgetting of some of this knowledge. One is accidental, and I called it memory loss. I thought that would, and it's not like some type of pre-Alzheimer's or anything like that. It's just that we forgot it. It's not important to us. We knew it back then. We are not using it right now, and so we have a tendency to forget it. And you see this with all of us, is that if that information is current and it's something that we're using right then, we know it. We can rattle it off. But you take us away even for a few months, and what happens is that we get cold on that information. We don't need it. And so that brings us to that point of memory loss, could be accidental. And then we go through, sometimes we have that unlearning. Many of us have to even go through the unlearning of different things. So from organizational history, we have accidental memory loss. People left with knowledge and that organization no longer has it. And then from new innovation, we have to learn how to do it a new way. Everything's technical today. We do very little with paper and pen. And so what happens is we are used to and getting used to doing it in a non document or non-paper way. And then you have premeditated ideas of this. So failure to capture. Do we have memory loss because we didn't have a process for capturing the knowledge? It does happen, and it has happened in project management. We didn't do a very good job capturing it because of the pressure to move on. And then a lot of times unlearning takes us over to premeditated avoiding some bad habits. We have bad habits, and one of the biggest ones we do not do a lessons learned on our projects. So we don't even learn. We repeat the same mistake in the next project and even in the next. And so many of you have said this when we were together. And so that source of knowledge that we need to do is to be learning from something and to have an opportunity then to unlearn these bad habits so that we are in better shape in the future than we are today. So lost knowledge is losing any knowledge could hurt current or future projects or business activities. Organizations recognize the loss of some knowledge, but some loss of knowledge is not seen for months, maybe even years when people get ready to go back and look for something. Retirement and Gallup state that a current of 21% yearly turnover of millennials increases that missing knowledge because once again, we've lost a quarter of our workforce going to work for somebody else. And so we've lost that. If you've ever, when you were working on any of your credentials or degrees, if you ever lost anything like a thesis or a dissertation, oh my gosh, you just feel violated over that. I lost my dissertation, my computer crashed, and I lost a copy of my dissertation, my current copy of my dissertation when I was doing my doctorate years ago. And I mean, I just cried. I was crying because I was just couldn't believe it. I had an old copy that was like 2 or 3 versions back that I had to actually print it off, and I had laid it on the desk going through it for some things. But it was like several iterations behind, and I was just sick. I mean, I was just thinking, oh, the work, and I had lost it to the hard drive. So when we talk about the types of lost knowledge, here's some things that we're looking at. First off, human knowledge. Human knowledge focuses on skills, knowledge, abilities of the individual, what the people know, how they do certain things. And there's nothing wrong with this. Now, you do understand that human knowledge evolves and ways of doing things are going to evolve. And that's okay. That's the way it is. Social knowledge. Social knowledge focuses on the relationships which are built over years. This comes from working together. And so you and I work together, we learn about each other. And so together, we kind of come up with our own way of doing something that's even faster than either of us did before. Then we also have cultural knowledge. This is part of our culture now. And so cultural knowledge focuses on how the organization conducts business and how employees engage. The culture prior to COVID was totally different than it is right now. And probably 99% of our organizations were much more virtual. Many people are still virtual 100%. And even if you're not virtual 100%, you probably have the hybrid thing going. So our culture had a huge shift because of the pandemic. And then you've got the structural knowledge. The structural knowledge focuses on the processes and procedures an organization follows when conducting business. So how we conduct business now might be totally different than how we conducted business before, even before COVID. So, and it changes, it evolves. With technology, it gives you new options and it changes the way you did it in the past. And so you go in a totally different direction. So a typology of lost knowledge, since we do lose knowledge from our company, Diane Vaughn, which is a sociologist, made this quote, and I liked it, and it said this: the invisible and the unacknowledged tend to remain undiagnosed and therefore elude remedy. Grouping all incidents or threats of lost knowledge together helps keep them invisible and makes it very difficult to get any traction in addressing them. You need to understand the 4 dimensions of lost knowledge problems in order to think more effectively about what intellectual capital your organization needs to retain. And of course, many companies have a big retention policy going, and maybe yours does too. And that retention policy makes a difference and dictates what you're going to keep and not keep. So lost knowledge can occur at individual or group or organizational levels. You have either anticipated or unanticipated effects because of it. If we lose that knowledge and they walk out, we're so limited in our SMEs, and you lose that SME with that piece of knowledge, how long is it going to take you to hire another person like that? How long will it take for you to be able to get somebody in there that has even part of that information? How tangible, have tangible or intangible impacts, and then create immediate or delayed costs. And so what are you going to do temporarily? So immediately you might hire a consultant, but how long are you going to be able to keep that consultant before you can get somebody who's going to be able to come on board and have that knowledge? So let's go back to our original thought and idea, which was the transfer of knowledge. Lost knowledge obviously is a piece of that. So when we look at knowledge transfer, first off, let's start with the individual. That's the employee you're trying to pass that information on to. But you also will find yourself transferring knowledge to a team. For an example, one person is probably not maintaining everything with that project. You're going to have a team of people that's going to be taking care of that. And so, like for an example, if it's a new piece of software and they're training everybody on the software and how the software works, they probably aren't just training one person. They're probably training a team of people who now, for the customer, will be maintaining that software. And then a lot of times you might even have organizational knowledge. We've changed the whole way we've done business. You'll see this a lot of times when the project now changes with security systems. So now what happens is we have all these security gaps to get us into the building, and so that nobody else can come into the building and harm any of us. So you've got your card and you've got maybe an eye scan or a thumbprint or whatever the case may be to get you into the building. And so now, and in the past, you could literally pull up to the door and jump out and run in, and you had no security. So now it might feel like overkill, but it's because now we have made that shift in order to protect our employees. So that knowledge transfer will be a little different based on what is the background of each of these people and individuals. Now let's talk about the term explicit knowledge. Knowledge that is shared and can be written or found in some form of documentation. Every company has explicit knowledge. Now, types of this would be formal organizational documentation, interviews with specialists, interviews with SMEs, external, internal training, because this has been documented, it's been written down, it's looked at under the umbrella of explicit knowledge. This, many times, is kept and held onto by the organization. But the challenge is that this is not the piece of the information that we always are needing. We're needing the tacit, which is coming directly from that SME. So tacit knowledge is that knowledge one gains from experience and wisdom. It's kept in one's head. This is the knowledge that we really are needing to open up the brain of that SME and be able to pick, because they have certain types of knowledge that they have learned from their experience. And it has turned into wisdom for them because they've applied those techniques to that experience, but it's not written down anywhere. So types of tacit knowledge can be undocumented, unrecorded knowledge. It could be very subjective, no doubt about it, but it's based on their impressions. It's based on their work effort in some of these situations. And so they get a sense of something that might be totally different than anyone else because of their ability of working with this type of situation over time. So ways of transferring explicit knowledge go pretty straightforward. Documented, it's recorded, it's shareable, it's storable, it's articulated because we've got it. So if you attend a seminar, it's documented. As we go and talk about what we're talking about today with knowledge transfer and closeouts, it's documented. You're seeing a slide, you're going to get a video, it's documented. But you don't have, the piece that we don't have a lot of times is what's in that expert's head in these situations. Tacit knowledge would include different things such as storytelling about the experience, where the person gives you the scenario, they explain the situation, and you're able to pick up on that. Mentoring, the coaching, being able to work with that group to be able to pass those skills over and walk them through various situations. And then communities of practice, to where we can go and where they have purposely, a group of SMEs have purposely documented some of this information, and so that other generations will be able to have it. Now, all of this has problems with it. All of this could have subjectivity or bias or any of those things. No doubt about it. I give you that. But the point I'm getting at is that there's so much more than what we just see that's written down. And there's so much more that we can pull from the SMEs. So let's take a look at knowledge transfer process. So that we can get the steps down, okay? So the first piece of this is the sender, who is actually going to be passing on this knowledge. And so you've got knowledge transfer that's going to be happening. It's the bulk, whether it's training for a new software system, or it's a new process that we're putting into place, or it's new steps that we have to follow to be able to get a certain outcome. And then what you're going to have is the receiver over here. And then over time, and once people have been trained in this, your organizational culture comes together and supports that over time. And so that's going to be very important because your culture will shift into this new way. But it's going to take time for it to become organizational culture. In the beginning, it's going to feel a little clumsy. In the beginning, you might even hear some griping because things are not the way it used to be. And so you're having to do something a little different. Now, the other thing, let's look at the range of knowledge. So over on one side, you've got tacit knowledge. Remember, tacit knowledge comes from the head of the SME. And so tacit knowledge is here, and you're trying to get it out of here so that the people can learn it. So it's personal experiences, it's knowledge, it's wisdom, it's good stuff. But the point is that you've got to be able to get that out so that people are able to start utilizing it. And then on the other side is your explicit knowledge, which is going to be documents and manuals, processes, procedures. So people can find this, they can follow this. You know, this is the international best practice. We can go through the steps and see it, okay? So all of those things are going to be very important to us. Now, knowledge retention strategy. Many companies actually have one of these in place. Your organization might have this as well. And so knowledge retention initiative. So for an example, what do we do to hang on to knowledge? Well, one of the most common is we rehire retirees. That's the most common practice across the world. So what the thought process is, the SME retires, there goes our knowledge. So we hire them back for a lot more money so that they can now bring that subject matter expertise in. Now, here's where it gets kind of silly sometimes. We many times still do not take steps of action to now get that tacit knowledge from that retiree over to someone else. We just hire them as a consultant basically, and they work with us. And that's fine, but that's not going to solve your problem long term. That person's still only going to be there temporarily. So a retiree leaves with internal knowledge of the organization, and many times they're the only person who knows it. So we hire them back as a retiree. So what does that do to your budget, to your project? Your budget goes up because, once again, this is like hiring a consultant. The second thing would be the outsourcing piece. All of us have done this as well. And you do what you have to do, but outsourcing brings in an outside consultant to bridge the knowledge gap. Outsourcing costs money. It takes time for the consultants to understand the culture. So there's a learning curve with that consultant. You can hire a good consultant, but they still don't know you, and they still don't know your company and the internal piece. And so this is going to take a little bit of time for that to get for them to get up to speed. And then the other piece of this sometimes that we'll see is regenerating lost knowledge that's already left, but we need to regenerate that because we're going to need it in the future. So regenerating internal knowledge stabilizes the organization. It maintains performance. It reconstructs lost knowledge. Some missing knowledge can be reconstructed in a relatively short time. But here's the thing. Once the knowledge is lost, there's almost always going to be something that's not there. And so you'll find yourself, even with good people, everybody trying to reconstruct everything, you'll still find that there's still something that's going to be missing here. Now, the triage for lost knowledge. So let's give you a few things here of how to handle the lost knowledge in the moment, okay? So questions to consider. So what is the level of importance of the missing knowledge that we've just lost? So if it's missing knowledge that we really don't know, we're just fearful that that knowledge has left, but we really don't anticipate and know exactly where it's going to fit, that missing knowledge might not make any difference. Why? Because knowledge is doubling. They're saying every 3 years, and some of the newer experts are saying every 12 or 13 months. So that knowledge might be gone. For an example, as you pass along knowledge for a lot of different things, we just do things differently now. So what's the level of importance? Second thing, what will it cost to recover the knowledge? Is the cost going to be more than what the knowledge, the replenishing or the recovery of that knowledge is really going to be worth? And then the third piece of this is, how hard is it to transfer the knowledge to others? And so what you're looking at through these new eyes. And so it might be cheaper to hire an expert to come in and work with those projects that need that expertise, because once that project's finished, that expertise really doesn't fit your organization or culture, except every now and then when it comes in. And so you'll see those things happen when those specific circumstances come up. Now, we've had a couple of people do something. I see it all the time. I know I'm speaking to the choir with this group. I know that. So when I'm talking about these things, so I know I'm speaking to the choir with you guys. So the triage knowledge at risk. So you're trying to bridge the gap of that knowledge temporarily is what we're talking about. So you analyze what knowledge is at risk of being lost or unrecovered. And so you're trying to look, remember, risk is always in the future. It hasn't happened yet. So you're anticipating what kind of knowledge. Now, this is a discussion we should have had before all the baby boomers walked out the door. This is a discussion we should have gone through the transfer of knowledge and documentation way before we lost those people. But it is something that we can be looking at now with our SMEs. Your SMEs could be going someplace else. Your SMEs might be relocating. So prioritize the knowledge from the most to the least important. And obviously the most important stuff, you've got to start being able to get that knowledge transferred over and document it. Determine if the lack of knowledge will reduce productivity or performance. Or is it just something nice to have, or is it a necessity? That's what you're looking at. And then evaluate if the knowledge can be restructured prior to needing it. And so in other words, is there a way for us to be able to get the knowledge temporarily right before we need it, if we do need it? Once again, if that's the case, I might not need an employee working on this for the next 6 months on the possibility, the low possibility that we're going to need this. And then you get into this idea of closing out the project. Now we're actually going to resurface and recycle this a little bit. In closing out the project, we think about finishing the project, handing it off, signing the last acceptance or verification notice for the vendor and letting them get paid. And all of that's important, okay? But there's a couple of things we should have done prior to getting to the handoff and the closeout piece. So when a project comes to an end, it will go through a closeout process. So what is that process? Your process might be totally different than anybody else's. So closeout includes pre-closing meetings. You start those meetings early. Why? Because you're going to have other things that you got to talk about and getting it across. So it can't be something to where it happens at the last minute. So pre-closing meetings, schedule for knowledge transfer. What's it going to take? Is it going to take 2 weeks of training? Is it going to take them working with us the next 3 weeks for knowledge transfer? That's why you've got to have some lead time before handoff. And then the handoff itself, what documents need to be signed? What documents do they need? What documents do we need? What does the vendor need? All of that. And then closing of the documents, because you're going to close that project out with the schedule, the documentation, the budget, and that's going to be archived someplace. Now, please don't be like some people I've talked to who never close out a project. They leave it open in case the customer needs something. Poke me in the eye. I can't understand that at all. Close that project out. If the customer needs something new, then turn around and start a new project. And that way you've got something to build with some structure from that point on. Don't leaving them open for people to continue to come back. So let's break this process down a little bit. So the pre-closing meeting, what exactly is that? It helps both the customer and the project management plan for the handoff event. You've got it in here as a stepping stone of what needs to happen. And so you're going to be scheduling it with the customer, and you're going to be talking about and come up with the agenda of what you need and what they need for that handoff. Handoff events need structure. They need time frames, especially if it's a large amount of training or a large amount of knowledge transfer. Because once again, if you've been on the other side and you felt like somebody dumped and ran with the project with you, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You needed several weeks or maybe even months for that transfer of knowledge to happen. And then schedule for knowledge transfer. Create a schedule for the knowledge transfer. It could include training, coaching, mentoring of the customer's staff, of their personnel. Also, the schedule can grow to multiple days, even weeks in some cases, to transfer the knowledge. And then this is consistently a weak area in software or product industries because we haven't really given the time. We put all our emphasis on building the product or creating the software, but not in how we're going to hand that off to the customer. And that's the reason why a lot of times the customers will rank people, project management low, and the project management was really not that bad. The problem was the handoff, and that was their total perception was in that handoff. So let's compare Agile and traditional handoffs, okay? So as we look at traditional, we go through, in traditional, we'll take the project through a variety of phases or processes, and then we'll have a deliverable handoff, and then we'll have phase lessons learned. So if you're doing it per phase, this would give you an opportunity to be able to hand something off to the customer from phase one, or even if you chose not to hand it off, to at least learn from that first phase. In Agile or Scrum, you've got it already pre-built in, because you run it by sprints. Each sprint you do at the end of it what's called a sprint review, which is kind of like a demo for the customer, and then you do a retrospective. A retrospective and a lessons learned are almost identical, and then you have the sprint handoff. In Sprint's case, or in Agile's case, you're giving that customer a piece of the project. You're giving them 15 features to start playing with while you work on the next sprint and give them another 15. So this allows you the opportunity to be able to work in these components and to be able to start passing stuff along, but you're learning from each sprint, or you can learn from each phase. Both of these will help you in being able to do this. Now, let's talk about the handoff itself. It takes place at the end of a phase, sprint, or the end of the total project. Sprints in Agile or Scrum handoffs is a portion of the project to the customer at the end of each sprint, so they get some functionality at the end of each sprint. A phase could have something like this as well in traditional, because you're handing off some part of a deliverable. You might not actually physically hand it off right now, but you normally have something completed for that project at the end of each phase. That's why the lessons learned fits so well right there. And other traditional projects, handoffs only once at the end of the project, obviously the deliverable would still be a place for you to have your lessons learned, because you're learning as you go along, even though handoff to the actual customer might not happen until the very end. So handing off the project can involve several steps. Validation of the project, it meets the requirement. The handoff process might include a series of checklists, tests, coordination, and shifting the project from the team to the responsible customer. And so what you're wanting to do is shift it, not dump it. And that's what customers feel like happens right now. They feel that sometimes the project is kind of dumped in their lap, and they hate that because they feel like now they've got a learning curve that's going to take the next several weeks. So how and what are you going to do for that transition plan? So your transition plan brings continuity from the project deliverables completed in the plan and handing the project off to operations. And so transition planning includes several things: dates of the transition, training, support for mentoring, coaching, extended time for transferring the project over to operations. Now, operations here, as we're talking about, that would be more like an internal project, but how long is it going to take us to get them feeling comfortable with the project, and then we can actually finish closing it out? That discussion has to happen, because if not, then you've got a customer who doesn't know what they're doing with the new product or the new software or whatever the new piece is, and so they feel clumsy at that state. So you find yourself having what we would call something like a post-project audit. So post-project audits are not mandated, but they focus on special types of performance. So did the project achieve requirements, goals, and our objectives? How often did the project deviate from the plan throughout its duration? Did the project bring the level of value designated in the business case or feasibility study? Can the knowledge gained while running the project pass over to other stakeholders? All of these are pieces that fit into your lessons learned, and it fits into what we would call value, measuring value at the end of our project with those documents that started off. Notice the next to the last question: did the project bring the level of value? Where did the value start? It started in the business case and the feasibility study that justified that project. And then when we finished the project, did that project bring that level of value? All right, so you created project celebration. Now we're great at this, aren't we? Woohoo! We're all good on this, aren't we? We celebrate, we bring in cookies. I mean, it's party time. So we have these pretty decent. Here's an easy way to do this. Bring your cookies in, do your celebration, and do a lessons learned with that. And so that's an easy way to be able to hook it all together if you want to do this and you feel like time's an issue, which we all do. So the celebration allows everyone to formally recognize the completed work. And so it is something for you to be able to say, hey, thank you so much for what you guys have done. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed working with you on the project. A lot of times you might make a presentation, but you don't have to. Congratulate the team. You're going to want to do that. And what to celebrate. Letter of appreciation. You could have an email for that, but you're still wanting to do all of this verbally. Also, major milestones, areas of growth, planning a meal, drinks out, whatever you're wanting to do to be able to celebrate it with your people, you can do that. And some of you have more restrictions than others. I get it, but you're still at least wanting to have some kind of meeting to thank the people for what they've done. You're going to have some closing documents. And so closing out the documentation includes more than showing the project that the project's over based on the schedule or budget. Documentation can mean different things to different people in the organization. And this is a challenge sometimes when you're working with your vendor, because you're wanting documentation from your vendor who might not be real motivated to do this. So your documentation piece, if you're having that issue, you want to spend more time in creating a template or creating the dynamics of what that vendor is needing to turn over at the end of that project. Documentation could be plans, notes, contracts associated with the project, or could include manuals, personnel to maintain the project. I mean, it can include a lot of different things because your project, the project base of those of you who are here on the call with me is so broad, it could include a lot of different things than what I'm naming. But you get what I'm talking about. You've got to be able to have the right documentation for that project to finish. And obviously you're going to be closing out the contract with that vendor. And so it typically comes before administrative closure. It focuses on verifying the contract obligations are complete, the contractor met all the requirements. And so all of that has been taken care of. And then you'll go into your administrative closure where you're closing out the contract. The vendor's been paid and you're allowing the project manager to close out the documents. And this is where you're going to move into archiving this with them. Now, closing out the documents can include a lot of different things. Now, your organization might actually have a document log of certain things that they want in the archive. Many companies do. So this is not exhaustive. It's just to kind of give you an idea, but your company might already have this. And so the project plan, risk analysis, change management, schedule, budget, all of those might be a document ready for archiving. And we actually have archived half of those, if you see on the grid. And so that allows you an opportunity to see, okay, this is what our company wants, the minimum documents they want per document or per project. And so this would be something that you would be putting into the archive for people to be able to go to. And then the actual closeout of the project includes several things. So let's start with the first. Let's go back to how it looks, the pre-close meeting. And this is where you set an appointment for the meeting, invite all the needed stakeholders that you think need to be there. Not everybody and his dead dog, okay? Just those you think that need to be there. And then create an agenda of potential topics that need to be talked about in that pre-closing meeting. And then schedule for knowledge transfer, discuss the rigor of the knowledge transfer, determine the time frame, prioritize the stakeholders who needs to be trained or that knowledge needs to be transferred first, which is going to be part of it. And then the handoff events themselves, schedule validation meetings, verify the contract, statement of work are complete, conduct a retrospective or lessons learned for sure here if you haven't done it all the way through. But I want to encourage you one more time, you want to do it all the way through because that is getting most of your articles that are coming out is saying that knowledge can be transferred faster if you will do a lessons learned all the way through your project at various times. And then documentation closure, you've got contract letter of completion, statement of work is complete, and then project documents with some narrative about the progress in that project are actually put into your archive. And then you're archiving the actual documents themselves. So you've got project letter of completion, a list of the archive documents, a project summary. All of this is telling people about this project and how it ran. And so people have an opportunity to be able to look and see, is this going to help me in a future project that they're going to be working with? Now, in archiving the documents, they're put into a knowledge base or organizational repository, and this is usually has certain stipulations for it. So find out those stipulations from your organization. But a repository documents build historical and explicit knowledge for future projects. But here's the thing, when we're talking about repository, everybody's projects are going in there. Everybody, it could be by department, everybody in the department, every project goes in there, or it could be for the entire organization, everybody's goes in there. So the organization a lot of times will determine which documents are going into that repository. And then potential documents for archiving, entire project plan a lot of times is in there. Any special actions or something special happened to the project, risk plan, risk analysis might be in there, and of course your budget, your actual costs, all of those could be part of it, along with schedules, along with anything else that was real specific to that project that people could learn from. And so when you're looking at your lessons learned, or I'm sorry, not your lessons learned, but your lessons learned, your retrospective, both, what went well, what were people unsure about? I like this because it talked about being unsure. Sometimes people don't know if it's good or bad yet. They just see that it happened. What didn't go well, and what actions did we take if we need to? I like this breakdown, and so I just wanted to show that to you. All right, so that brings us to our closure of today's lesson. So let's talk about a couple of things for you. Our June webinar is going to be on applying emotional intelligence to promote strong team interaction. So if you've not done any study in emotional intelligence has been around for a while, but PMI has really been pushing emotional intelligence for a project manager to be able to interact with the team and to be able to do it in a wholesome way. So we're going to talk about it a little bit next month. And so that'll be on June 9th. And then we still have 4 boot camps left for the end of the year. And so these are all virtual instructor led. I'll be doing every one of these. And so if you have someone who is going to take their PMP, you want to go ahead and get this done. Just as a word of encouragement, there are no calculation questions on the test now. And they are not using PMBOK as their main guide. They have their own material. And so you want, the test is very workable today. So I think it's much more realistic. So if you're thinking about doing it and you were scared of the calculations, no calculation questions are on there right now. So all boot camps are going to be live, virtual, instructor led. Also, for those of you who maybe need some help getting your application adjusted and just need some help understanding the whole PMP process, there is a free mastermind group. I just finished one today, and so I've got my next one coming up in September. It's free to anybody that wants to be part of it. They don't have to come to my boot camp if they want to, if they just need help in this area. So they go through this, and it takes about an hour a day for 5 days. And so they are able to, they'll watch videos, they will fill out different things of their parts of their application. I do 2 Zoom calls so that they can ask any question they want. Plus, this allows them to have a discount from $28.50, which is our price for our boot camp. It drops it down to $15.50, and the people are able to, that's with a guarantee. So it's the cheapest price we have. Plus, we give 1 free scholarship to somebody who attends this. And so that's a drawing that takes place. And so we give a free scholarship. They attend the boot camp and take the test for free. So, or they could attend the boot camp for free. They have to pay for the test themselves, but they do get to attend the boot camp for free. And so we give away 1 of those. So we give 4 of these away every year for scholarships in this area. So that allows them to do this. All right. So let me stop right here. Let me open this up for some questions and see if someone might have a question for me before I let you go. And so any questions that you might have? Any questions from anybody? Let's see something in the chat here. There we go. Retirees. Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for that comment. You're absolutely right. The retiree loss, absolutely. It's horrible, isn't it? And so, and we watched them walk out the door and really didn't give it much thought at all, you know, because, and yeah, I agree with you. The retiree loss at Monty is absolutely right. Anybody else have a question or anything? All right. Thank you so much for being part of this. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it gave you some food for thought. And I'll see you next month as we talk about emotional intelligence. Hope you have a wonderful summer here with your kids out of school and everything. Okay. So God bless you guys. Thank y'all for being part of this. I really appreciate it. And so I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.